Welcome to the Disability News Report. I'm your host, Jennifer Price, where we are changing the narrative of general everyday topics by intentionally including people with disabilities. So today I'm actually talking about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a mental disability that it affects how someone thinks, feels, and just goes about the world because their perception of reality can sometimes be different than what is actually happening. So I'm doing this actually by speaking with someone, Rose Parker, who has schizophrenia. We're going to learn what it was like for her to go through her adolescent life and high school being undiagnosed, living with schizophrenia. She wasn't diagnosed until she was an adult, about 21 years of age. And then we're also going to go through, her therapy sessions, what a good therapy session looks like, how therapy can help, and what advice she has for you if you have a loved one with schizophrenia, or if you're interested in engaging with someone, right, developing a relationship with someone with schizophrenia, what it is that you should know when you are trying to develop that relationship with someone with schizophrenia, and also what you should know if you have a family member with schizophrenia and you want to help. This is from someone living with the disability. All of that coming up next. All right, so Rose, it's great having you on the show today. Welcome to the Disability News Report. I'm glad we're able to talk about such an important topic.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I've listened to some of the episodes on your podcast and learned more about you and just your life and living with schizophrenia. One of the things that I learned was that you were diagnosed later in life. So I'm just kind of curious to know, at what age were you diagnosed with schizophrenia, and what was it like up until the diagnosis, sort of living with a disability that you were not aware actually had a title?
Um, it was, I was 21 when I was diagnosed. It was a couple of months after my 21st birthday. But I had been receiving treatment for psychosis for a few years prior to that because I had the big episode that started me on like antipsychotic medication and serious treatment at the beginning of my second year of university. Before that, for a year, I had been receiving counseling at the counseling center, and that's when I first really started talking to anyone about my psychotic symptoms. So it wasn't like the beginning of treatment getting my schizophrenia label, but it was when treatment really started to work for me and things really began to fall into place and make sense. Because before then, we didn't really know what we were dealing with. Labels kept changing. I kept getting psych labels tacked onto me by different psychiatrists. The therapists that I saw before my current one, who I started seeing around the time of the schizophrenia diagnosis, didn't really give me any labels, but the psychiatrists kept giving them to me. And it was really confusing, and they didn't really have a clear idea what to do with the medication, so they just kept raising and raising the doses, and that was causing all sorts of problems. And but before any of that, I've had psychosis symptoms literally as far back as I can remember. Like, some of my earliest memories involve like hallucinations and delusions and such. And it it was very strange because there were things I would experience, and when I tried talking about them with people, like the voices or the colored light hallucinations that I see, people would be like, "What? No, I think you're talking about something else, like stream of consciousness, or you've been looking at a light for too long." And I was like, I don't think it's that, like, but other people must be right. And I just thought there were strange parts of life that you weren't supposed to talk about. And my world growing up was very fantastic because there were things that would come out of the dark. And there were, and I thought I thought it was a medium. I thought I saw ghosts and that spirits spoke to me. And I'd see flashing colors that didn't exist, floating all throughout my screen of vision. And I thought I spoke to fairies, and I kept a journal about it. And you know I kind of lived in this other world. And then as I reached adolescence, and many of the hallucinations became very dark around the age of 14, 15, and I slowly started beginning to piece together that I had hallucinations and certain things were delusion or paranoia. But I wouldn't get full insight into that until later, into my later teens and 20s, when I started seeing professional help. I didn't develop a full level of insight until I started actually learning about psychosis, though I did develop smaller levels of insight at an early age. So overall, it was a very long and drawn out process.
Yeah, and I remember you discussing on one of your episodes that you began to systematize people and ideas, and you said in a sort of an ABC fashion. So, can you
Yeah,
kind of give an example of what you mean by that, and maybe like in high school, for instance, when you would systematize a school situation?
yeah. Well, because I had a lot of trouble understanding other people, and schizophrenia spectrum disorders can have very similar social symptoms to autism, though some of the biology may or may not be different. But I didn't understand a lot of the social world around me. And for me, this created some resentment and difficulty of empathy, but I really tried to overcome that. So what I did is I was like, okay, people have X reaction, this must mean why, and I would try and sort of understand people's reaction in sort of a flow chart. So like if the teacher was expressing irritation at me, I would sort of try and figure out, okay, I couldn't just automatically understand why she was irritated at me. So I would go through a list of what my behaviors were and try and figure that out. when but it wasn't always the best, because like when I'm having alogia or poverty of speech, I can come across as very cranky.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't pick up on things like that. I would always look for like external, very logic based solutions for people's problems. So if someone was sad, I would always think a very logical flow chart, like things like, oh, we just got our test back. Maybe they didn't do well on the test, when it would be something more emotionally based, and I would start talking to them about the test, and then they'd get like mad at me. So it would create difficulties in the social world. Like a lot of people had trouble understanding and relating to me, and I can understand why they did to some extent. I just wish people had not been quite as short.
Sure. So you mentioned that you then went to therapy, and one of the things that you learned through therapy was that you don't have to fully, you stated, understand what they're experiencing to emotionally connect with the person. So my question then, just to fully understand the diagnosis, is that a part of schizophrenia, sort of emotionally disconnecting, or is that an aspect of it?
I, you know, Schizophrenics often feel emotions very strongly, but for me, I think it might be more of an effect of growing up with pediatric schizophrenia than schizophrenia in general, because especially untreated pediatric schizophrenia, because I didn't have any help learning to navigate the world with a very different sort of brain. I had to just wing it. And I had to learn interacting with a world that was very different from the one I grew up from what my internal world was. And I also experienced a lot of developmental trauma. And I think it was very hard for me to sort of understand the other, if that makes sense,
Sure.
because I was so wrapped up in what was going on with me and how lonely I felt, but I wanted to. And because when I was growing up, I was so stuck inside of myself, I it was a real pain that I couldn't figure out how to relate to other people. So one thing my first therapist helped me learn was that I didn't have to feel the emotions other people were. All I had to do was like talk to them and try to understand what they were going through and know that I can feel sorry for them or want to help them. Because one thing I'm very good at is trying to figure out practical ways to help people and help in my own ways. And just because it's not like empathy is most people think of it, it's not necessarily bad, and I can still be helpful and a good friend even if it's harder for me to relate. And I
Sure.
have gained more empathy as I've dealt with my traumas. So I think it might be more of a developmental trauma going untreated type thing, but it's all very complicated. Does
Sure.
that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. I understand what you're saying. And just to continue with therapy, we know there, all therapy is not created equally. All therapists aren't created equally, and some therapists are better than others, and sometimes you click with one therapist more than another. So for you, what does a good therapy session look like?
I've had several therapists over the years, and for me, the best therapist I've had is my current one, and Miss B. She follows. She's very person centered, which is when you value the experiences of the client. You sort of view the client as the expert in their own life, and she takes a strengths based approach. So when she does use CBT, which is focusing on behavioral modification, she focuses on my own strengths, and she's very good at using my strengths to guide me and encourage me in any behavior change I need. She's very encouraging, and when she does do reality checking and guiding me back to reality, she does it in a way that helps me, that speaks to me, and she's very frank and direct, which might not work for a lot of people, but in someone who can't understand sarcasm, it's very useful. I can't understand coded language.
Sure.
So her being able to go, Rose, you're being ridiculous. It's very helpful.
I think just quite frankly, I think it's a little refreshing when people just sort of put it out there, because coded language can be subjective at times, right? I mean, sometimes we can decode and figure out and read between the lines, but then other times it can be a little difficult. So I can certainly appreciate somebody just putting it out there and not making me, figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's been very helpful with like figuring out graduate school and such, because she's an art therapist in LPC,
Mm,
but she's working on a PhD currently, because I've this semester I applied to master's programs in counseling, so she helped guide me on that as well, which was very helpful.
nice. Well, I met you on Instagram because you're definitely all over Instagram. I love your post, and I love your list post, especially. One of them, which I'd like for you to discuss today, concerns 5 things that you want non-psychotic people to know. So, do you remember some of those things that you stated that you'd like for non-psychotic people to know?
Oh gosh, I don't remember what I said in that one.
Okay. That is totally fine. Is there anything that you would, can you just think of anything in general that you'd like non-psychotic people to know that you think would be helpful, whether it's developing a relationship with someone who might have psychosis, or just interacting with someone on a, maybe a colleague at work that's not a developing relationship?
There's a couple of things that I'm thinking back to. One was one thing one of my professors said to me that really changed her perspective when I told it to her, was that we're not at the wills of the command voices.
Mhm.
Command voices are when you hear voices, either internal or external, that tell you what to do. And this professor is she has clinical, she's a clinical psychologist, and she thought psychotic people need to be hospitalized when they heard command voices. And I was like, no, I first told a command voice no when I was 5 years old. I figured out how to tell a command voice no when I was 5 years old and had no help. in the middle of the night, no less. And she had no idea that most of us are used to telling command voices no, and do so for often many years before we get help. And that's
So
something.
is saying something like that, would that be a part, go into the ableism category? Do you think it's,
Yeah,
sort of
well,
patronizing or?
I apologize if I was hard to understand. Well, it's because a lot of people think command voices equal hospitalization, equal danger, and command voices don't automatically equal hospitalization or danger. Many of us live with them day to day. They're not the scary horror movie symptom, and many non-psychotic people don't realize that, even clinical
Mhm.
people. So that would be one thing. The other one I would say is the psychotic diagnoses are not an exact science. Between like psychotic depression through schizophrenia, there's many biological overlaps, and the disorders as individual entities aren't fully understood. There are differences, but where the lines are not solid,
Mhm.
and getting one diagnosis or another is not an exact science.
Sure.
So you shouldn't box people in by symptoms,
Sure. Sure.
by diagnoses. So
Yeah, so then I would imagine then the therapy is not going to be some sort of cookie cutter approach, right? It's very
yeah,
individualistic.
the diagnoses are there to help guide the professionals, but those diagnoses are not, they're not nuclear physics.
So then is there anything that you um, might continue to struggle with when it comes to developing relationships with a partner, like an intimate partner, meaning?
Oh gosh. Um, I haven't thought about that in quite a while, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, I have worried about communication because I don't really get blunted affect. I get cranky affect. I
Mhm.
sound cranky when I mean to be sound neutral.
Okay.
And and it's the most annoying thing. And it's like it's my version of blunted affect. I absolutely hate it. And it's hard getting people used to that. I'm trying to work around it, and but and also just getting someone used to the symptoms. It takes a long time. But I don't know. I have graduate school and I have so much of work. It's not something I'm really thinking about right now.
Are you really come across and appear to me as someone who's very comfortable with your disorder because you've learned who you are, and you live it every single day. So does that also translate into being comfortable telling people, and if not, is there some sort of a standard that you set with a person, but like a girl that you meet or whomever, before you decide to open up with them about your disability?
I'm pretty open. At this point, I don't really make any issue to hide it.
No.
I mean, a lot of the time it's pretty obvious, um, because of like, I mean, earlier this year, I was having issues with dystonia, and my face would often become like partially paralyzed and stuff. So I mentioned it a lot in Zoom classes and stuff in case my face started doing anything weird. Um, but I usually say it pretty early on when meeting people. I don't really have any issue with hiding it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think that there's anything wrong with it, wrong with having a disability. I think it's important to embrace who you are, whatever it is, whether it's a disability or any other aspect of it. And it's a part of, we all have something, and that it's a part of all of us. So we all have to learn to, um, navigate the world that we're in with every the cards that were dealt, so to speak, as some people say. Is there anything else that you would like someone who's watching this, who is not psychotic but has a psychotic family member, to know if they are, just trying to help or just trying to understand. Is there anything that you can think that or any advice that you can think to tell them if they're in that position? Is that something that you would have wanted a family member to help you?
Communication is often not one of our strong suits. Um,
I'm
I
assuming you're talking about verbal communication.
Yes,
Okay.
I know I write a lot, and I know a lot of people read what I write, but talking day to day, a lot of times our bodies don't really want to talk. A lot of times we have issues talking. That's what disorganized speech is. And a lot of times we have a strong desire to isolate. If you want to learn how to help your psychotic loved one, pay attention to things they need help doing. Like if you notice they don't do their laundry, ask before doing it, but ask if you can help them with their laundry or something like that. Ask if you can get them a bottle of water, and just ask how they're doing. You need to be proactive in helping, because part of the issue of psychosis is it kind of makes you recoil away from other people, and it makes it harder for you to ask for help, which is really unfortunate. But just and it we are harder for other people to understand. If another thing is, sometimes when I get disorganized speech and I get echolalia attacks, find it really hard to stop saying the word, whatever word or phrase I'm repeating. So if it's something like that, some odd behavior, and they can't stop and it's annoying you, they probably aren't doing it on purpose to annoy you.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's important, definitely, to know. Well, Rose, I appreciate you coming on and talking to me today and to help me and everyone who's watching get a better understanding of schizophrenia, psychosis. Um, I encourage everyone to go to your Instagram for sure, because you do also are, like I said before, you are active and you do provide some good bits of tips and advice. It is at psychosis. I always want to say positivity, but it's not spelled.
There's an S after the P.
Yes,
It
yes.
was an attempt at a pun. It doesn't work very well. But I'm stuck with it.
Well, it's funny because when I first saw it, I thought positivity, and then I looked closely, and I was wondering if that was what it was. Yeah, so I do get it. I do get it. So thanks again, Rose. You take care.
Thank you. You too, ma'am.
Thanks.